He retreated from tormenting the soldiers in his outfit, and never wanted to be alone. He spent more and more time on base, surrounded by his co-workers, delaying his inevitable return to that uncharacteristically empty, silent apartment. But he always had to. And while the cleanup crews did their best, not much could be done about the blood already baked into the asphalt by the unceasing summer heat. Gary always tried his best to avoid looking at the large dark stain in the parking lot right in front of the elevator, or the almost negligible splotches on the walls the cleaners missed. He seemed to notice more and more of them each time he passed by. "This one's nasty," he'd overheard an EMT say. "I've never seen a fall this bad." He was working on a report at home when he heard a terrible crash in his living room, punctuated by a heavy impact that shook the floor. Thud. Did something get knocked over? Thud. Footsteps. No. These were way too loud, too kinetic, to be footfalls. He rose to check, but growing suspicion stayed his feet. Thud. He thought he heard several secondary impacts, as whatever was falling crumpled to the ground. Falling. He began to shake as his subconscious finally began connecting the dots, disparate clues coalescing into one horrifying certainty. "You'll hear her jumping." Thud. Stilling his breath as much as possible, he got on the ground, shimmied beneath the bed, and squeezed his eyes shut. The bed wasn't raised very far off the ground, and he found himself face up, with no room to move except to turn his head left and right. Thud. The bedroom door flew open. Tears flowed freely as he balled his fists and clenched his teeth, fighting to control his rapidly hyperventilating breath. Thud. This one landed right beside his ear. Up close, he could hear it all. Bone splintering. Flesh tearing from the wet impact. And then all was quiet. Nobody knows how long he stayed there, frozen in place, eyes shut, barely daring to breathe. Terrified as he was, even the adrenaline roaring in his ears wasn't designed to last forever. His pulse eventually slowed, and hope cruelly began to rear its head in his mind. Had she moved on? Was it over? Fearing the worst, he chanced a glance to his left. When the eyes perceive something the brain refuses to acknowledge, time seems to bend. Everyone's gone through it to some degree. A breakup text, a positive diagnosis, a gun barrel in the face. The mind is seized by conflicting impulses, one half screaming for action as reptilian instincts of self-preservation kick in, the second trying its utmost to deny a reality that has already established a firm, non-negotiable grip. Time slows during this neurological tug-of-war, casting every terrifying detail in stark relief. The first sergeant found him under the bed during a wellness check when he failed to report the next morning. Gary lunged out from his hiding spot, clutching him like a lifesaver and blubbering out his story in between hitching, gut-wrenching screams. The horror he beheld was enough to have him hospitalized for months. In that time, he attempted suicide thrice. The fourth, well, we already know about that one. You see, the priest had been right. But only in principle. Whatever was staring at him under the bed, through cloudy, lifeless eyes, could never have bent over to leer at him. It was broken in all the wrong places. If she were jumping around the apartment in that absurd pogo-like fashion he'd imagined, the staff sergeant would have been entirely, irrefutably safe. The rookie priest just hadn't considered one thing. She'd landed on her head. Wait, you said he didn't kill himself? I mean, he tried 3 times, barricaded his door and everything. Maybe he just finally figured it out. I shifted uncomfortably against the guardhouse. The first sergeant turned to fix me with a steely look. You can't barricade doors in a mental ward. You think he would have been the first to try that? And the last couple times I spoke to him, he didn't seem suicidal at all. He just really didn't want to be alone. I felt the rational part of my brain clicking on overdrive as it fought to deny what the first sergeant was driving at. You're telling me a ghost simultaneously held the door shut, tied a noose around him, and flung his ass out the window? What about the nurse who tried to save him? I'm saying there's a lot that doesn't add up. The only person who saw that nurse up close was a doctor. Chakrabarti working the next ward over. Not only did the doctor not recognize this woman, he said she was wearing the widest grin he'd ever seen. The sergeant paused, taking a long drag of his cigarette. And he sure as hell doesn't know any nurse that wears red.